So we talked about implications of AI for war and warfare, and how he's pretty way off the mark for this in particular. And then there's a interesting conversation he has at the World Economic Forum. Again, I think we know what the WEF is and what it represents, who it represents from a theological lens. It is not a group of theologians who are doing interesting work on economics. So just keep that in mind. That being said, he was seated with this guy who is the leader of Google's research program, and they had a somewhat interesting discussion on the economic implications of artificial intelligence, and I will just let them speak for themselves.
But I'm going to turn to you, Demis, because so far we haven't actually seen any discernible impact on the labour market. Yes, unemployment has ticked up in the US, but all of the kind of economic studies I've looked at and that we've written about suggest that this is overhiring post-pandemic, that it's really not AI-driven. If anything, people are hiring to build out AI capability. Do you think that this will be, as economists have always argued, that it's not a lump of labour fallacy, that actually there will be new jobs created? Because so far the evidence seems to suggest that.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the near term, that is what will happen, the kind of normal evolution when a breakthrough technology arrives. So some jobs will get disrupted, but I think new, even more valuable, perhaps more meaningful jobs will get created. I think we're going to see this year the beginnings of maybe impacting the junior level, entry level kind of jobs in turn.
So again, this is really hard to square, right? Like, what jobs, just as a thought experiment, what jobs would be created as a result of AI proliferation, right? That's one question, right? The second question to what he just said is, what would be the consequence of supporting the creation of said jobs, right? So there is plentiful research that suggests cognitive decline, the cognitive decline of those who use AI profusely. So the problem with all of these tech bros, all of these Silicon Valley guys, is that they do not have a grounding in ethics, right? These are not ethical philosophers. They do not know what is the good for human nature. They don't know what human nature is. They don't know what human nature should aspire to be. They do not have normative answers to these very fundamental questions, which is why, again, as Christians, we need to be very careful as to what leaders and what spaces we listen to and what leaders and what spaces we respect, right? So this is nonsensical, right? This is like, it's almost a misnomer to talk about job creation and then not talk about human fulfillment. You cannot talk about job creation and then not talk about human fulfillment. Like, okay, what jobs? Okay, that's great. You have this idea that, like the Industrial Revolution, there will be a number of industries as opposed to the majority of the human race farming and supporting themselves and their entire family being devoted to the land. Now we have engineers, we have, specialization, like hyper specialization, which is great. I guess it's great. I guess it's great that we all have nice houses and we have running water, but we have no idea who God is. Like, that's great in his idea. Obviously, for us, it's way more nuanced. Many people would say that the Industrial Revolution was one of the gravest mistakes humanity has ever done in terms of meaning, marriage, childbearing, the basic liturgies of life, right? Going to church, farming, being close to the land, right? Exercising your God-given right in dominion, in the image of God, you being made in the image of God, right? There are a number of ways in which our world has become more senescent over time, right? We're progressively leading, as history progresses, a faker and faker set of lives, right? We live in front of screens. We don't get enough sunlight. We're not socializing, loneliness. There's opioid epidemic. There's a number of things that would not be possible pre the Industrial Revolution, though that's probably a topic for an entirely different video. And obviously, there's no going back, right? There's no going back. It is up to us as Christians to be the light of the world and to use these things properly and to be a light in such a way that the way these things are meant to affect us do not, because we have the Holy Spirit and because we have lived out such radically different lives that these secular liturgies no longer have a hold on us, right? And no longer have such said devastating consequences. So that would be the Christian vision, high and large, without getting into specifics. But again, there's this question of tech bros do not understand the necessity of ethics in the things they're thinking about. Like, they're pure materialists. And I'm not accusing, I don't know his religious beliefs, but the way in which he approaches these problems are purely materialistic. And should I expect something better? Should we expect something better? No, obviously not. These people are not professing Christians. We should not expect better from them. But there is a larger societal issue at play, right, where we worship, right, tech experts, industry experts who are not interdisciplinarily trained, right? Like, it does not matter if you're an engineer at any of these tech companies, or that's great. God wants you, the Lord wants you to discover his handicraft and to employ technology. And like, all of this was in the plan, in the works for Adam and Eve, right? Building things and building cool things, that's really great. The issue is that when you separate it from a consistent moral framework, when you talk about jobs, you talk about productivity, but you don't talk about the human good. So again, the second question I proffer to what he just said is, what jobs, number one, what jobs would be created, right? And number two, what would they entail, right? What consequences are at play, right? Because we know the research suggests that consistent use, consistent time in front of a screen as opposed to reading. We also know that taking notes on a laptop versus taking them in person by hand, right? These things have deleterious effects on the psyche, on the mind. So again, how do you justify the creation of these new jobs if what you're suggesting, if I'm understanding you correctly, that there are going to be a number of jobs that are tied to the creation and proliferation of AI? So if it includes using AI at your desk job, then what does that do to your mind, right? And these things need to be weighed out. So let's just continue.
This type of thing. I think there is some evidence, I can feel that ourselves, maybe like a slowdown in hiring in that, but I think that can be...
Yes. Okay, so at least he's honest here. Some reporting has been suggesting that graduates of the 2026 college class might be looking at anywhere from 20% plus unemployment. So there is definitely research to suggest that new graduates, recent graduates, are suffering. And this not only applies to those who, went to decent schools, but this also applies to those who went to really good schools, Ivy League schools. My friend groups can attest to this.
I know that the labor market is adaptable, right? It's just like, 80% of people used to do farming. Farming got automated, and then they became factory workers and then knowledge workers. There is some level of adaptability here as well, right? We should be economically sophisticated about how the labor market works. But my worry is, as this exponential keeps compounding, and I don't think it's going to take that long, again, somewhere between a year and 5 years, it will overwhelm our ability to adapt.
So you heard it from him. Essentially what he's saying is that as artificial intelligence becomes increasingly more sophisticated, there will be labor market disruptions that overwhelm our ability to transfer workers who have been displaced by this technology. That's what he's saying. So again, this proves the point that there is an expectation of labor market disruption, even among CEOs who are financially incentivized to play these things down, right? So it's probably worse than what they're saying is one point, but they admit that this is coming.
Even if we get all the technical things right that Dario's talking about, and the job displacement is one question, we're all worried about the economics of that, but maybe there are ways to distribute this new productivity, this new wealth more fairly.
So again, there is more foreshadowing of a coming reality where many of us will be displaced from our normal jobs, and there will be a universal basic income setup such that everyone gets a certain percentage of the proceeds of the so-called productivity that commences. That is a pretty dystopian reality if it comes true, right? The idea that no one's working, the things that we used to do with our hands, no one is doing. In fact, now everyone just gets a free piece of the pie to quell some of the populist concerns we have with the proliferation of this technology. That's what he's suggesting. And then he has somewhat of an interesting response as to meaning, the meaning question we brought up. But then he sort of drops a ball in how he frames it. So we'll just hear what he says here.
And if we have the right institutions to do that, but that's what should happen at that point. There should be, we may be in a post-scarcity world. But then there are even the things that keep me up right now is there are even bigger questions than that at that point to do with meaning and purpose. And a lot of the things that we get from our jobs, not just economically, that's one question, but I think that may be easier to solve, strangely, than what happens to the human condition and humanity as a whole. And I think I'm also optimistic we'll come up with new answers there. We do a lot of things today, from extreme sports to art, that aren't necessarily directly to do with economic gain. So I think we will find meaning, and maybe there'll be even more sort of sophisticated versions of those activities. Plus, I think we'll be exploring the stars. So there'll be all of that to factor in as well in terms of purpose. But I think it's really worth.
So, see what he did there? He sort of mentioned how meaning and purpose loss would be one of the major issues that we would have to deal with as a species when this technology really kicks in and really comes into play. But he sort of throws in a level of optimism which is not supported by the trajectory of this technology, right? So he said, I'm really optimistic about how things might be able to turn out, and I think we already have artists and athletes and astronauts who are doing these really cool things, and they would just be incentivized, and freed up, frankly, or new generations would be freed up to explore their interests if there was some financial institution or way in which these proceeds could be distributed fairly. Again, great that he mentioned meaning and purpose, but again, he's doing so in a way that is fundamentally futurist, right? So my point is that his optimism is unfounded, right? Like, how do we know we'll be free to explore the stars and that's actually what human beings' purpose is? Like, he offers nothing to the question he's proffered, right? That is the dilemma at the end of the day. Why does he think that everything is going to turn out okay? Like, on what basis does he think that? We're already seeing how AI is being used on battlefronts around the world. Is that not a cause of concern first before you start thinking about the moon and the stars and, colonizing other planets? Like, is that seriously in consideration right now? Are we playing Star Trek when we have so much inequality as it stands? You get what I'm saying? It's like, where does your optimism lie in? The Christian response to that is we don't hope in anything. We don't hope in anything except for Christ's coming and the kingdom of heaven, and the kingdom of heaven being fully realized and exerting its dominion over earthly affairs. That's where our hope lies. Our hope does not lie in colonizing other stars or, economic prosperity or being free to, pursue your passions. We don't believe that. We believe the human soul is inherently broken, right? The human soul needs to be disciplined. It needs the active, continuing influence of the Holy Spirit to know what you were made for originally. This is what we believe. So these tech bros do not have a fundamental competitor to what we have to offer. And this is why we need to be speaking truth regardless of where you work, right? Having answers, thoughtful, theological, biblically based answers to these questions go a long way, right? But this is how we should be thinking about AI, and this is why these answers that some of these folks try to proffer, really, they fall flat. They're simply not enough. They do not meet the needs and demands of our age, right? And this is inherently a Christian responsibility.
Going to come with these other attendant disruptions. And but I think the other issue is the geopolitical competition. There's obviously competition between the companies, but also US and China primarily. So unless there's an international cooperation or understanding around this, which I think would be good actually in terms of things like minimum safety standards for deployment, I think Dario would agree on that as well. I think it's vitally needed. This technology is going to be cross-border. It's going to affect everyone. It's going to affect all of humanity. Actually, Contact is one of my favorite films as well. So funnily enough, I didn't realize it was yours too, Dario. But I think, those kind of things need to be worked through. And if we can, maybe it would be good to have a bit of a slightly slower pace, than we're currently predicting, even my timelines, so that we can get this right societally. But that would require some coordination.
Yes, he had a couple good points. Yes, he is absolutely right that there should be some level of international, nonpartisan agreements that would prevent, international misunderstandings. That being said, is that likely? Absolutely not. That is not likely in the slimmest of margins. That's not going to happen. That's not happening for obvious reasons. So that's as much as I wanted to show in this clip, and then we'll just skip to the next thing.
But Dario, let's turn to this now, because one thing, since we last spoke in Paris, the geopolitical environment has, if anything, I don't know, complicated, mad, crazy, whatever phrase you want to use. Secondly, the US has a very different approach now towards China. It's a kind of no holds barred, go as fast as we can, but then sell chips to China. And that is it. So you've got a different attitude towards the United States. You've got a very strange relationship between the United States and Europe right now, geopolitically. Against that, I mean, I hear you talk about it would be nice to have a CERN-like organization. I mean, it's a million years from where we are, from the real world. So in the real world, have the geopolitical risks increased? And what, if anything, do you think should be done about that? And the administration seems to be doing the opposite of what you were suggesting.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're just trying to do the best we can to, we're just one company, and we're trying to operate in, the environment that exists, no matter how crazy it is. But
again, more Dario, brother, you're doing a lot of qualifications, a lot of preempting before your answer. We're just one company. We're trying our best.
I think at least my policy recommendations haven't changed. That not selling chips is one of the biggest things we can do to make sure that we have the time to handle this. I said before, I prefer Demis's timeline. I wish we had 5 to 10 years. So it's possible he's just right and I'm just wrong, but assume I'm right and it can be done in 1 to 2 years. Why can't we slow down to Demis's timeline?
Well, you could just slow down.
But the reason we can't do that is because we have geopolitical adversaries building the same technology at a similar pace.
Ah, yes. You cannot slow down building a technology which will destroy the entire world because someone else will do it. So we're just gonna both be complicit in destroying the world. This is his understanding of geopolitics. Well, it's gonna burn anyway. We might as well be the ones who are doing the burning. Like, what kind of logic is this? This makes no sense, again.
It's very hard to have an enforceable agreement where they slow down and we slow down. And so if we can just not sell the chips, then this isn't a question of competition between the US and China. This is a question of competition between me and Demis, which I'm very confident that we can work out.
And what do you...
So again, China is not our enemy, right? China is not our enemy. China's banking system has billions in US treasuries, right? They are dependent on the US dollar. They are very dependent on our consumer economy, on us buying their manufactured goods. Whatever goes on in the news, oh, China's doing this, China's doing that. China is not our real. China is not a ideological enemy of the United States, right? Russia, the Russians are an ideological enemy of the United States. We as Americans are very individualistic, very capitalistic. Russia has a different history with that. And we've been at odds with each other for a while. Does that have to be the case? Again, and this is a nuanced question. This requires a nuanced answer to this question. No. Number one, we do not have to be enemies with Russia and China. We do not have to be enemies with Russia and China. Despite what you're hearing in the alarmist, sensationalist media, poisoning your mind with fear-mongering, America is indeed protected by 2 oceans. We have not been invaded in several hundred years, right? We have very little to fear, right? Realistically speaking, there are about 350 million Americans, and we have, 450 million guns? Like, isn't the quote, under every blade of grass there is a firearm? Paraphrasing, but we have very little to be worried about in the short to medium term. This idea that China is getting stronger and, we can't handle that. Like, we did not flip our policy on China until the mid-2010s, right? Every professor of political science will attest to this. John Mearsheimer talks about this. We did not flip on China until the mid-2010s. We were very pro-China after coming to an agreement with them in the 90s, after inviting them to the World Trade Organization, right? That was us who invited China to the UN, to have a spot in the UN. China is not our natural enemy, right? Like, this is not, we are far beyond the throes of the Cold War. Like, we do not need to be stuck in 1970 or 1980. This is a world in which numerous countries can prosper, right? But the idea that Dario is speaking about, which is that we have these natural, eternal enemies in Russia and China, and the worst thing we could do is like sell chips to them, is quite off the mark. China is not our enemy in regards to this technology, and Professor Zhang speaks about this in his videos. But China is not our enemy. China wants to be left alone, right? China has always wanted to be left alone. It's always been like that. They've always seen themselves as the middle kingdom, right? This is their political philosophy. They just want to be left alone. They want to be respected. They obviously don't want to be exploited. They don't want their economies to be suppressed. They don't want their currency to be suppressed. Like, these are very basic and obvious things they would want. But the idea that they're angling to become this world superpower to spite the United States is simply not historical. It's not a fact. Does Russia want that? Russia is closer to wanting that. Whether they're justified in wanting that or not is a separate issue, because throughout the 90s, after coming to an agreement, after the destruction of the Soviet Union, we came to agreement with the Russian leaders, and we promised them that NATO would not expand into the Soviet Union. We lied, right? We lied so much so that NATO expanded all the way through Eastern Europe, all the way to Ukraine, and hence Putin's invasion of Ukraine being a sort of preemptive understanding that if Ukraine were to join NATO and to potentially be a nuclear-armed power, that would be a red line for Putin. Does that mean Putin was right in how much bloodshed has occurred on that battlefront? Obviously not. Does that mean Putin is this righteous saint of a Christian and he represents orthodoxy? We're not Orthodox, but for any Orthodox believers on an ecumenical channel like this one, I'm not of the opinion that Putin is this, saint, this clean. He's worked for Russian intelligence for a while. I'm sure you see pretty gnarly things working in any intelligence agency. Murders, investigations, just really nitty-gritty stuff that would alienate you from a proper relationship with God. So it's not as if he's this paragon of morality and he's doing the right thing. Like, we all understand what realpolitik is. We all understand what realism is in political science. The idea that countries do what is aligned with their best interests, and sometimes that involves not nice things. And this is how countries operate, because they are part and parcel of what we spoke about, the kingdom of man. The kingdom of man has its own rules that are intrinsically opposed to that of God, right? The kingdom of man supposes violence, domination, oppression, manipulation. The kingdom of God supports truth-bearing, truth-witnessing, self-sacrifice, love of the other, love of one's neighbors, love of the needy, and acceptance of your own persecution. Meaning, the kingdom of God is part and parcel with martyrdom. So there are very different rules and sets of rules between these kingdoms, and they've been in conflict in the spiritual realm since the primordial sin of Adam and Eve, right? So this is the difference. That being said, Dario's idea that we have some pseudo, and the way he speaks about it is just so pseudo-spiritual. It's like, Dario, you're speaking about this as if we've been at war for thousands of years and we have a set of ancient texts that describe this war and prophesied these wars. And like, this is not the relationship we have with Russia and China, right? Russia fought with us in World War II, right? The Russians died in mass so that we could win World War II. Like, where are their flowers? Just being neutral with this. So this idea that there are bad guys out there and we're the good guys is very antiquated. It's very old. No Gen Z person who consumes a healthy amount of independent media thinks this. We've had plenty of really bad calls. A billion Afghanis dead, right? We went into Afghanistan, we pulled out, and now the Taliban is there. Like, we have a reckoning to do.
Area of potential risk that doomers worry about is a kind of all-powerful, malign AI. And I think you've both been somewhat skeptical of the doomer approach. But in the last year, we have seen these models showing themselves to be capable of deception, duplicity. Do you think differently about that risk now than you did a year ago? And is there something about the way the models are evolving that we should put a little bit more concern on that?
Yeah, I mean, since the beginning of Anthropic, we've kind of thought about this risk. I mean, our research at the beginning of it was very theoretical, right? We pioneered this idea of mechanistic interpretability, which is looking inside the model and trying to understand, looking inside its brain, trying to understand why it does what it does as human neuroscientists, which we actually both have background in, try to understand the brain. And I think as time has gone on, we've increasingly documented the bad behaviors of the models when they emerge and are now working on trying to address them with mechanistic interpretability. So I think I've always been concerned about these risks. I've talked to Demis many times. I think he has also been concerned about these risks. I think I have definitely been, and I would guess Demis as well, although I'll let him speak for himself, skeptical of Doomerism, which is, we're doomed, there's nothing we can do, or this is the most likely outcome. I think this is a risk. This is a risk that if we all work together, we can address. We can learn through science.
Yes, through science. Yes, science will save us. Science will save humanity. So this is the difference between us and the world, right? The world believes in science. The world believes in this futurism ideology that has no metaphysical foundation. There's no guarantee for a great human future. Like this idea that human progress is inevitable and everything is just going to turn out great as long as we have better technology for it. This fails to address the issue of the human heart, right? This fails to address the issue of the human heart. You cannot litigate, you cannot technologize, you cannot digitize away human greed. This is so big, this is so fundamental to any realistic understanding of human nature that these tech bros simply do not understand, right? They think technology will save us, colonizing the moon will save us, colonizing Mars will save us. Like, this is how these people think. Is this not a better or a more conclusive representation of the ideology behind the Tower of Babel? What is the difference between their thinking and those who constructed this ancient ziggurat in human history? Like, what is the difference? What is the difference? Like, we can do this, we can build this, we can progress, what is the difference? There is no difference. So this, again, is silly. He offers no proof, no evidence for the plausibility of these things turning out well. He's just optimistic, right? He hasn't pointed to any international councils or any ways in which they're really progressing with the mechanistic interpretability mechanism he mentioned earlier. He's not pointing to concrete things that would prevent this, that would provide a guarantee against this technology turning on us. He simply does not have that. And as a CEO, obviously there are financial incentives, stock-wise and otherwise, to keep the operation afloat, right? That's what you want. You want to be the face of the company. I get it, but this is silly at the same time. This technology has eschatological importance, right? So we're not to downplay it in any way and simply just be optimistic for the sake of it, as if we all share your mechanistic, materialistic, futuristic viewpoint or worldview. Like, we don't. The majority of the world disagrees with you, Dario. The majority of the world disagrees. The majority of the world is insanely religious. Like, no one thinks like this outside of the West. No one thinks like this outside of we're just going to continue to progress. You bring this technology, this conversation to those in third world countries, and they're like, oh yeah, this is definitely going to destroy the world. This is how people think, but it's because we're in this bubble, this ecosystem of nonstop talk of progress, as if this is inevitable. It's coming. Frankly speaking, the human species has not changed in its entirety of its existence. We still lust, we still murder, right? We are still subject to violence, to jealousy. We're really, really messy creatures, and you don't have to be Christian to understand that. But the idea that progress and technology is going to bring this all, has it technology? We've made the advances we've made in medicine and all this. What is this transhumanist like, oh, disease and all these things? Well, I'm sorry, but none of us are going to lift Adam's curse without the resurrection power of Jesus Christ himself. It is simply not possible. The universe will not listen to us. Our bodies will not listen to us, because the universe listens to God. The rocks listen to God. The rocks listen to God. The rocks worship Yahweh, right? We're not overcoming this through our own mechanisms. So all of this is really, really silly when you think about it. And these things need to be addressed. And I hope the way in which we've discussed these things have given you tools or talking points or things to think about when you have coworkers or otherwise who, think like this.